Welcome everybody to another Suidlanders chat on the Suidlanders media channel with me, Marius Greyling, and Simon Roche. Simon, how's things going your side?
Yeah, going fine. Thank you very much for asking, Marius. I'm just a little bit stupid. For the past few weeks, where's my little show and tell? Here it is. Oh, beg your pardon. For the past few weeks, I've been making small little errors and, all sorts of little things. And the other night I went to bed having concluded that my end was to be senile dementia. For those people for whom English is not a first language, senile being the opposite of juvenile. So the dementia that comes with age, and I worried about my sons and it's early onset. I'm only in my 50s, but clearly, this is going to be my end. Anyway, I did an interview on World Broadcasting Network on Sunday, and I was explaining to the lady, the owner of the radio station, how I thought that I had done something ever so clever. That instead of buying, I like to occasionally have one of those effervescent tablets, Berocca or Slow Mag, or there's one called Plus
Mm.
with three S's and a Z on the end, spelled stupidly, but it's very good, very effective. Pick you up in the morning, brighten you up, but it can be expensive. And I happened to notice in the co-op this thing, OptiBoost. I don't know how well it's
Okay.
being picked up in this light. So it's a similar thing, but for animals, and it's got all sorts of great ingredients here. It's got about 7 different B vitamins, more, and all sorts of vitamins and amino acids and some other stuff too that's neither vitamin nor amino acid. And I've been taking that stuff because it's about a quarter of the, no, even less, call it a tenth of the price volume for volume. And I read out all of the ingredients to her. And when I read the one tryptophan, she said, Tryptophan? Anyway, I just ignored her and kept on reading, making my point about how I discovered a fantastic thing for me now and for the future because it's relatively cheap. For 62 Rand, you can make 200 liters worth of this booster. And in the time that lies ahead of us as a prepper, it will be a very good thing for ill children, breastfeeding mothers, people who haven't had nutritious diets for an extended period of time in circumstances of crisis. So I finish my story, and she then says, tryptophan is one of the main ingredients in controlling your mood and your sleep. She said, have you been feeling very sleepy lately? I said to her, you won't believe it. I stopped having middagslappies over a year ago. I cut out that habit of having a
Mm.
midday nap some time back when I got my blood sugar under control with chromium polynicotinate, which was like a miraculous thing in my life. I said, but just recently, I'm keep on being tempted to have an afternoon nap. She said, and have you been wandering around, sort of in a daze? I said, no, I haven't been wandering around in a daze, but I have been making little errors in basic things, that errors I've never made in my life. She said, yeah, that'll do it to you. So if I get muddled up this afternoon, you know why. It's going to take me a couple of weeks to get all of this tryptophan out of my system because my brain is functioning as your brain might function after, let's say 3 days of intensive work, long hours, whatever. It's now 9 o'clock at night on the third day, and you have to hold a serious conversation with somebody for some reason, and you forget your aunt's maiden name, and then you muddle up a birthday, and eventually you say, geez, I've got to go to bed. I'm not winning here.
Yeah.
That's the state that I'm in at the moment.
I've done exactly the same thing. I can relate a lot because I'm allergic to iodine, and one of my mates bought us vitamins, the Centrum from A to Zinc, and I was starting to feel ill. Took a couple of tablets, started to feel worse. Take some more tablets, and then one morning it hit me. It says from A to Zinc. Somewhere in between, iodine is located there, and it was,
Yeah.
and it was. So I was busy poisoning myself. It was, yeah. Stupid mistake. So I can relate completely. Simon, off
Um,
air, we discussed the 3 points that we're going to discuss, and strangely enough, they've all got to do with each other. The first one is the SCO summit that was held in China with big parades, big deals being made between countries, and so forth. Then it's the new pipeline, the Power of Siberia 1 and 2 pipelines. And the last one is the whole Venezuela and US, almost I want to say conflict. Maybe it's not conflict yet, but it seems to be conflict soon. But yeah, the SCO summit, there was some interesting things coming out of that summit.
Yes, Marius, when we spoke the other day, I called the Shanghai Cooperation Organization a financial and economic bloc. And even as I was saying it, this is one of these stupid blopsies that I typically wouldn't make. I knew that I was talking rubbish, but I couldn't think. It's not, it's a security organization. It was founded years ago um, to counter terrorism in Central Asia. So from the Chinese point of view, it had to do with the Uyghurs, and from the point of view of the Central Asian states, it was to do with radical Islam within their societies. They are Islamic societies, but there's a difference between an Islamic society and a society that goes kind of Taliban or
Mm.
Wahhabi. So that summit was held sort of a week and a half ago, and and there were all sorts of agreements reached, and it was a very successful summit. And then the Chinese celebrated 80 years from the end of World War II. In the West, we celebrate victory in Europe, VE Day. The Americans have a second end of World War II date, and that pertains to the war in the Pacific against the Japanese. Much later than that, we're talking months now, not years, obviously.
Mm.
This is all 1945. The Chinese finally got rid of Japan from Manchuria, and they were invaded in 1931, the Chinese. So for them, what we know as World War II was a very, very, very much longer event. It was a 14-year long event, although they were only fighting the Japanese, but nevertheless. So they celebrated 80 years on the 5th of September, not on one of the previous dates this year. You'll remember that I was in Russia on the 9th of May when they had their victory
Yeah.
day. That's victory day for them, 80 years. And it was quite a magnificent experience. In some ways, well, definitely one of the most wonderful experiences of my life. The mood is just something that has to be experienced. And so many of those leaders remained in China from the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting
Yeah.
to last Wednesday, the 3rd of September. And Vladimir Putin flew in, and in the official documentation, I haven't seen this myself, but I heard somebody else talking about it. Apparently, it explicitly says uh, guest number one. That
No.
tells you
Okay.
everything.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, guest number one in a category all by himself, Vladimir Putin. It tells you a lot about the relationship. And they were on a high because the SCO meetings had gone well, particularly successful, just great reports coming out. Now it's the Victory Day parade. And lo and behold, they put on the biggest triumphal procession, if you like,
Mm.
in history. I didn't have a helicopter. I wasn't counting the numbers, precise numbers of people, but apparently for size, it is the biggest in history. And this is extremely important. They did that for a reason. It wasn't by sheer accident that they put on an event of that size with all of that war material that they showed off, some of which commentators still don't, I haven't heard anyway, still don't know its purpose. During those days, Vladimir Putin met with Kim Jong Un, and he offered 100,000 troops for Ukraine. In fact, I don't want to go so far as to say pleaded, but there's a word in English that's not used very often, importune. It's not pleading and begging and wheedling and whining, but it's kind of persisting in making an offer.
Yeah.
These are phenomenal events, absolutely phenomenal. There have never been Asian troops in Europe. Connected to this, a few days ago, one of the big commentators did an exercise in calculating how many troops Britain could send to Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire. Now, there's not going to be a ceasefire. Vladimir Putin's made that clear, but the Europeans persist in saying what we should do is have a ceasefire. And Vladimir Putin and Sergei Lavrov say, no, you've fooled us too many times. How stupid do you think we are? We know that you will only take advantage of that opportunity to rearm Ukraine. So it's to our relative disadvantage. It's not going to happen. And you're not going to put troops in there to supervise or to implement the ceasefire. So the significance is quite phenomenal. The Europeans too weak to do the thing that they're proposing. The British could manage at most 5,000 troops, including cooks and bottle washers and payroll people and so on and so forth. So maybe 1,000 or fewer frontline infantry troops, peanuts. And on the other hand, you have an Asian nation offering 100,000 troops for somebody else's conflict. And now we segue a little bit to the second of the three topics of today. In all of this, it turns out that Gazprom, the big Russian oil and natural gas producer, signed a deal with the Chinese to build a pipeline running from Siberia, northern Siberia. I remind our viewers who don't know this, that Siberia is, roughly speaking, this is the exact definition of it, but it's, as you'll hear, as exact goes, it's quite loose. European Russia is everything west of the Ural Mountains. And they're not really mountains. The main peak behind my house is 200 meters taller, higher than the highest peak in the Urals, in the Bamboo Mountains. So generally they're low hills, but Russia's a flat country. So by their standards, it's the Alps, you know. East of the Urals is Siberia. So northern Siberia is that thin strip of Russia that abuts the North Sea and the White Sea, and that is frozen for much of the year. Running from northern Siberia down through Mongolia to China, a giant gas pipeline for natural gas. And it will provide something like 80 billion cubic meters of gas a year.
Yeah.
It's very big. Apparently, the Chinese pay a preferential rate for Russian gas. If it's not the cheapest in the world, it's one of the cheapest in the world. And we don't know the details yet. But apparently, for this deal, they've negotiated an even lower rate. So they're getting enormous amounts of energy for domestic use and most especially for industrial use for decades and decades and decades to come. By contrast, the Europeans, that gas that went through Nord Stream 1 and 2, the pipelines that were blown up by NATO, to Europe from Russia, through the Baltic Sea, between Sweden and the Baltic countries, namely Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. That gas has now been, the Europeans are not going to get it, is apparently the same gas, or there's a very big overlap. Meaning that even if the Europeans made nice with Russia tomorrow, they wouldn't have access to that cheap gas that used to run through Nord Streams 1 and 2. So the Europeans are decidedly, they're in trouble for the foreseeable future as far as affordable gas for domestic heating and industrial energy purposes is concerned. So they're going to be forced to rely on the USA. Now, what the USA provides is liquefied natural gas. So the Russians pump this natural gas through these enormous pipelines, and it's in gaseous form. But in order to economically ship gas across the Atlantic Ocean, it has to be liquefied first. In other words, it has to be compressed, made more
Yeah.
dense, so that more can be carried by a gas tanker ship. US gas is relatively much more expensive. I've seen various figures, read various figures. One of them claims, the one article that I read, that when all is said and done, by the time you've taken this into account and that into account and the next thing into account, US gas will be 4 times, or is presently, it is always 4 times more expensive than the Russian gas.
Wow.
So the Europeans are sailing into a world of pain this winter in terms of domestic heating,
Yeah.
and a world of pain for the foreseeable decades economically. I'll segue again. The US has just sent a bunch of warships, very heavily armed warships, not rowing boats by any stretch of the imagination, to Venezuela. Unbeknownst to most people, Venezuela has the largest oil reserves on the planet. More than Russia, more than Saudi Arabia, more than Qatar and Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates and all of the rest of the usual suspects. It has a socialist government. It's something like Cuba in that sense, something like the 8 communist countries of Europe of the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. Because in most of those 8 Warsaw Pact countries, communism was imposed by Russia when it rolled westward over the German armies during World War II. Whereas in Russia, it originated in, depending upon what date you want to use, 1917 or 1922, from within. So our instinct as conservatives is to hate Venezuela. Communists, terrible.
Yeah.
The fact is that South America is, after Africa, by far the most badly run continent on Earth. You know, there's clear daylight between Western Europe, North America, certain parts of Asia, and then other parts of Asia that are not so kosher in terms of governance. And then you've got South America and Africa, way beneath them. South America, many countries in South America, not all, have been basket cases for decades and decades and decades. I don't approve of socialism. I am bitterly opposed to communist and socialist forms of government that estrange people from the salvation of God.
Mm.
So people mustn't make the mistake of reading their own treatises into my words. Thank you, Professor. But socialism has, in a certain way, been a very, very good thing for Venezuela because it has ensured a one-party system of government that in return results in order.
Mm.
And you don't have civil war and you don't have the massive crime problems, the gang problems that you have in many other parts of Central and South America, where the gangs are practically the government and people are found lying dead on the streets in certain suburbs every single morning without fail, 365 days a year. The current president of Venezuela is a guy by the name of Nicolas Maduro. And I don't particularly like him, but he is doing a good job of keeping the country stable.
Yeah.
And of pumping what little oil they can, or of extracting what little oil they can of this largest, underground resource in the world to keep the country on an even keel. Now, why they not pump, they can't pump freely because of U.S. sanctions. The U.S. has been biting at Venezuela since forever, particularly in recent decades. And in this past week, they demonstrated their own lie. They gave the lie to their own words, as we say in English. They gave the lie. Because Donald Trump says, he said, Venezuela, the intelligence services of the USA have revealed that Venezuela is a drug cartel government. It's run by the drug cartels. It's a drug nexus. Now, everybody knows that that is not true.
Yeah.
In socialist and communist countries, it is true that they're bad and they're wicked and we don't like them, but there is order. There's no anarchy. There's no chaos. There's no drug gangs running Venezuela. That problem is in Colombia and Mexico, and every last person knows it. Let's say Venezuela did have a drug problem, which it doesn't, but let's say that it did. It still wouldn't even be in the class of Mexico and Colombia. So this absurd premise was presented to the United States of America to manufacture consent, as we say or as the Americans say, they use that phrase, the manufacturing of consent. And they've sent this flotilla of warships to Venezuela to do what we don't know. But what it may be to do is to decapitate the government and to implement regime change.
Yeah.
So that's the gist of the story, Marius. That's my half an hour introduction to these three interrelated concepts of energy warfare and countries siding with one another and endeavoring to help one another and coming up with these fantastic solutions. I mean, the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, that's the name of the pipeline, if I didn't mention it, from northern Siberia to China via Mongolia, it's just the significance is fantastic. It's going to ensure that China has energy security for decades and decades and decades to come. It's going to ensure that China is dependent upon Russia forever, and that Russia is dependent upon China forever. I'm not saying they couldn't have a small scrap, but by and large, the one is not going to upset the other because it desperately needs so much gas for its burgeoning economy. And the other is not going to upset the first because it needs, billions of dollars of revenue every year, billions and billions and billions and billions. And it's been just a hang of a week. I've got 3 pages of notes here on the fantastic developments of the past week, all sorts of things. But you and I agreed to limit this conversation just to those 3 events because I really wanted to give a bit of a lecture, a sermon of the import of those 3 events and their somewhat interconnectedness in the past week. Absolutely ginormous. And I thought to myself yesterday, I had some time to myself. I spent a while catching up, and so I watched the entire Chinese military parade of last Wednesday, the 3rd of September. I watched the short version, 2 hours and 38 minutes. And I remember thinking to myself, now I know for sure. Now I know for sure that the things that we've seen emerging in recent days, in recent years, I beg your pardon, BRICS and related to BRICS, the shift to the East, the decline of the West and the USA, and all of those interrelated things. Now I know I can't be wrong, which is a vain thing to say. The Lord will put me right in my place for saying things like that. But I mean to say, now I needn't have a scintilla of doubt. I'll give you another quick example, Marius. Do you remember how the USA sanctioned Russia over SWIFT, alienated them from the SWIFT system?
Yeah.
And from the global credit card architecture, which belongs to 2 companies, Visa and MasterCard. They've surmounted the SWIFT obstacle. I told you about the 7 various kind of payment system type things that they've come up with. And now, apparently, the Russian Mir card, Mir has 2 meanings in Russian. It's exactly the same word, but it has 2 completely different meanings. The one is peace and the other is world.
Okay.
And the Chinese Union Payment or Union Pay card can now be used in respective countries.
Oh, okay.
Which means one thing. It means that 10 years from now, Visa and MasterCard will have at least 4 billion fewer customers.
Sure.
Because the world that is going the BRICS way
Yeah.
is going to jump on that bandwagon. They're going to pay less money for the architecture within their systems. They're going to be doing more business with China, probably not Russia. Russia doesn't do that much business with the world. It sells gas to its neighbors and petroleum, and for the rest, it's not a great, whatever, frying pan manufacturer. I don't know. The writing is on the wall, Marius, and I'll
Yeah.
just end with that.
Yeah, I watched the interview with Jeffrey Sachs. He openly said that the US has been after Venezuela's government and military for more than 20 years. It's always been a regime change so that they can control the oil that Venezuela has. On that note, he also showed evidence that China, Russia, and Iran has already said they will side with Venezuela. And then China has sent to Venezuela these they're like a floating refinery. And the first one arrived today there. There's lots of pictures and videos of it. So China's already investing in Venezuela for their oil again. So they're getting gas from Russia. They're going to get oil from Venezuela. China is being very, very clever at this stage. And what's interesting for me to say that Russia, Iran, and China has said, listen here, Venezuela, we are with you guys. We're not going to let the US bully you. So interesting times lying ahead. And yeah, can't wait to see what's going to happen. I mean, it's been a circus this last year and a half, but the circus, I think, is just going to get worse and worse or better and better. It depends on what kind of viewpoint you have about the world ongoings at the moment.
Yeah, I think you did right, Marius, and I think the Western world is in for a very alarming wake-up call because if you talk to most people about these things, they're clueless. There's a lovely lady who owns a restaurant in town. I get on nicely with her. She's always been good to me, and she, does me little favors. She said to me when I came back from Russia something like, "Why didn't you bump off that blasted Putin when you were there? I can't stand that man." And my dad said to me, "Now, Simon, just tell me what on earth made you go to Russia?" And then when I explained that to him, he said something about why on earth would you approve of that Putin guy. So I had to give both of them, a little bit of an explanation. But the Western media is lying through its teeth about everything that we're witnessing.
Yeah.
My point being that when the chickens come home to roost, when US citizens find themselves being conscripted to fight in 3 or 4 different wars that they didn't vote for, when people suddenly discover that China has the world's largest economy or whatever, it overtakes the USA. When people discover that the inflation that's been eating away is now taking meaningful bites out of the value of the dollar, I think they're going to be. I think it's going to be a rude awakening. I don't think Western Europe and North America fully understand how much trouble they're really in. So I agree with you.
Yeah.
Desperate times are going to call for desperate measures, and sooner or later, somebody in the West is going to do something very stupid.
Yeah. Simon, thanks once again for a lovely chat. And yeah, that's exactly why me and you do these types of programs, is to inform people, not just the normal news that you see on the SABC or the wherever your news channel is in your country that you're watching from, but to actually people that are studying and looking for the truth of the matters of why certain countries are doing certain things. And I mean, if Putin does something stupid, me and you will be the first guys to say, oh, why is Putin doing something like that? Just like we're doing with Trump and some of these other world country leaders. But at this stage, it looks like the West are the ones that's the clowns and the East are doing the right things. Simon, let me stop myself from monologuing here too much. Thanks once again, and then we'll chat tomorrow or the day after tomorrow.
Yeah, thank you for the chat, Marius. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Cheers,
Okie
man.
dokes.
Have a good one.
Cheerio.
Bye.
Yeah, same to you. Bye-bye.